Audrey here with us, Audrey Atkins. She is a wonderful, wonderful teaching artist that we get to call ours. She's been with us for about a year now, I think it's been. And she's just been incredible, especially, during once COVID hit, she really stepped up to the plate and has helped us so much. And just been so wonderful, and we just love having her. But anyway, Audrey is a local Birmingham writer. She is also the Director of Community Engagement at WBHM, which is Birmingham's NPR news station. She's been blogging and freelance writing for the last 20 years and has been published in Birmingham Magazine, Mobile Bay Magazine, as part of their the Bitter Southerners Folklore Project, and has been published in AL.com's It's a Southern Thing. And then 3 years ago, she had her very own book published. They call me Orange Juice. And so she's a very special teaching artist of ours, and we're so happy to have her here tonight. So you guys feel free to talk and converse with her throughout this class, because what is writing if not just kind of talking in your head? So talk out loud, feel free to ask questions and converse. And then if you love Audrey as much as we do, she is going to be teaching a class starting in March. So you are more than welcome to sign up for her class. It's going to be amazing, and we're very, very excited for it. So Audrey, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you for having me. Y'all, I want this to be just a fun, casual evening. Feel free to speak up and ask questions. You can interrupt me. We'll just have a good time and hopefully learn something along the way. So this class is called Write Your Life. And when you write your life, that's what's known in the parlance as creative nonfiction. So what exactly is creative nonfiction? Well, creative nonfiction is where you take all the words that are swimming around in your head and your heart and your soul, and you smash them up with art and creativity and fun expression. It's just that, creative nonfiction. It's stories that are based in fact, told in a fun and interesting way. I talk with my hands a lot, so if this was a live class, it would be it would be different. So if I'm waving around too much, I apologize. But you see creative nonfiction everywhere, and you probably just don't realize it. Creative nonfiction is in blogging, it's travel writing, it's those long form journalism pieces you might read in the Atlantic or Vanity Fair. It's memoir, it's biography, it's speeches, it's personal essays, it could be your diary, it can even be poetry. So creative nonfiction is everywhere, but the constant thread is that it's based in fact, but it's told using literary conventions. And we're going to talk about some of those literary conventions tonight. But one thing we want to start out when we talk about facts is just, this is my little word of warning to you. If you want to write the stories of your life and publish them in public, and you want to write about other people, you have to ask their permission. You have to let them say, yes, you can write about me, and put it all out there for all the world to see. And when we ask people's permission, what do we have to be prepared for? Anybody want to? For them to say no, I saw it. I'm not a lip reader, but I saw that. You have to be prepared for them to say no. Now, if you want to write about your mean old sister in your diary and hide that under your mattress, that's fine. Do that. But if you want to publish that on your blog so that everybody in the free world can read it, you got to ask your mean old sister if it's okay if you rat her out to the whole entire world. So let's get started. Most stories have a structure. And it's called The Hero's Journey. I'm sure anybody that's ever taken sophomore English class in high school has probably heard of the hero's journey, the narrative arc. But what that basically is you have your hero, and if you're writing about your life, you get to be your own hero. If you're writing about somebody else's life, they can be your hero. But usually there's some inciting incident, something that kicks the action off. And then there's like conflict. And usually your hero will find herself in a impossible situation, a situation that's just beyond hope. That's what kicks everything off. You have your conflict. Then your hero will set out on the journey and have some sort of setback that will result in some kind of big climax. And then you, the hero, will have some sort of revelation, some sort of epiphany. You'll learn a lesson, and then the whole story will wrap up, and you'll tie a little bow on the top and put it in your little box. Narrative arc. You get to be the hero of your own story. You get to go through all these, and you can hear that narrative arc in songwriting. Any song that you've ever heard that tells a story, you can hear that. You can read it in poems. Once you start looking for narrative arc, you'll see it everywhere. So narrative arc is all fine and well and good, and I feel obligated as a writer and the daughter of 2 former English professors to tell you about narrative arc. But I have one rule of storytelling. And you can take narrative arc, don't tell my mama, but you can take that narrative arc and you can throw it out the window as long as you are not boring. That's my number one rule of writing is don't be boring. Write stories that people want to read. Write stories that you want to read. This is your life. This is your chance to tell it. This is your chance to own it. This is your chance to make that trip to the dry cleaners seem like a grand odyssey. So write your fun stories, tell them in fun ways. That's what creative nonfiction is about. So I mentioned literary convention, and tonight we're going to go through a few of them. Theme, voice, mood, setting, and character. And I'm going to do a little talking, and I'm going to do a little reading, because one thing that if we want to be great writers, we also have to be good readers. And you can emulate things that you read that you like. So throughout this evening, I'm going to read some works by other people that I hope will be exemplary of the literary convention that I'm talking about. And that they will be fun and entertaining. But y'all, I gotta tell you, here we are, all in the pandemic. We got all this political stuff happening. We've got racial injustice, like things are sad and bad and terrible and weird. And it's been a hard year and change now. So I tried to find some uplifting things to read. It is hard to find a lot of uplifting things to read. But I've got some that I think will be funny, some that are not quite uplifting, but maybe heartwarming. But anyway, like I said, I want this to be a fun class while we write our fun stories. Stories don't always have to be fun. I've taught this class now, the long version, 3 or 4 times. And I have been so overwhelmed by the stories that the class members have written and read and shared. I mean, some deep and serious stuff. So I'm a fun person. I like to tell funny stories. I like to make jokes. But your story may not be like my stories. Your stories might be serious and heartwarming and fun. So I don't want y'all to get the impression that everything's got to be fun and funny, because it doesn't. All right, first thing we're going to talk about, am I going too fast? Am I talking too fast? Everybody okay? First thing we're going to talk about is theme. Every time I say theme, I think about in the Christmas story movie where she's like, students, you have to write a theme. And they're all like, oh. But anyway, theme is the idea or concept that carries through your entire story. It's something that resonates with the reader. It's your central topic. Now, I've got a list of themes, common themes, but does anybody want to just sing out what they think some common literary themes are? I'll kick off with one to give you an example. Good versus evil. Anybody else want to venture a guess as to some other possible themes? Y'all don't be shy. Don't be quiet. Feel free to speak up.
It's like my whole brain went blank.
Isn't that the way it always happens? Okay. Well, I'll lead us through some possible themes. There's coming of age, loss of innocence themes. Duty versus love is a theme you see a lot. If these are not your themes, don't feel like these have to be your themes. You might have your own theme. The underdog that overcomes some insurmountable obstacle. That's a theme you see a lot. Here's one we all need, and we have seen a lot. Finding inspiration in a dark time. That's a theme you see a lot. Home, it can be home, it can be betrayal, it can be trust, it can be ambition. Just all these sort of big, grand life questions can be your theme. Again, not every story's got to have a theme. These are not engraved in stone rules because these are your stories that you're telling in your own way. But it's nice to have a theme because theme gives people something to relate to. It'll carry your reader along with you and they'll think, I can identify with that.
Can you have more than one theme?
You can have more than one theme, but when writing a story, you don't want to put everything in one story. I had a lovely gentleman in my last class, and he wrote 2 really great stories, but he jammed them all together in one story. So when you're writing, you have to be able to recognize when you're putting too much in there. So you can have 2 themes. It could be, like coming of age, loss of innocence, that sort of thing. It might be coming of age and poverty, that sort of thing. You can have 2 themes. I just always caution against diluting your message. I've had this book for a long time, and I think it's just as funny as all get out. It's by Florence King. It's called Confessions of a Failed Southern Lady. It's a funny book, but right in her introduction, she hits on the theme of her whole book, and so I'm going to read this a little bit, and I think that it will be a good illustration of theme. And her whole book, if you ever read it, carries throughout this theme. And she flat out states her theme. You don't have to state your theme. It can be intuited by your intelligent reader, but she pretty well states it. So here we go. Florence King. There are ladies everywhere, but they enjoy generic recognition only in the South. There is a New England old maid, but not a New England lady. There is a Midwestern farm wife, but not a Midwestern lady. There is most assuredly a California girl, but if anyone spoke of a California lady, even Phil Donahue and Alan Alda would laugh. If you wish to understand the American woman, study the Southern woman. The sweetening process that feminists call socialization is simply a less intense version of what goes on in every Southern family. We call it rearing. If the rearing is successful, it results in the perfection of femininity known as a lady. I was reared on the day in 1948, and this gives you an idea of the time period, of the age of the person that's written this book. On the day in 1948 that I got my first period, my grandmother gave me a clipping. I suppose it came from the Daughter's magazine since she never read anything else. It said, "When God made the Southern woman, He summoned His angel messengers, and He commanded them to go through all the star-strewn vicissitudes of space and gather all there was of beauty, of brightness and sweetness, of enchantment and glamour. And when they returned and laid the golden harvest at His feet, He began in their wondering presence the work of fashioning the Southern girl. He wrought with the golden gleam of the stars, with the ever-changing colors of the rainbow's hues and the pallid silver of the moon. He wrought with the crimson that swoons in the rose's ruby heart and the snow that gleams on the lily's petal. Then glancing down deep into His own bosom, He took of the love that gleamed there like pearls beneath the sun-kissed waves of the summer sea, and thrilling that love into the form He had fashioned, all heaven veiled its face, for lo, He had wrought the Southern girl." That my mother referred to this pan as a crock of shit goes far to explain why Granny worked so hard at my rearing. She was a frustrated ladysmith, and I was her last chance. Mama had defeated her, but she kept the anvil hot for me and began hammering and firing with a strength born of desperation from the day I entered the world until the day she left it. This is the story of my years on her anvil. Whether she succeeded in making a lady out of me is for you to decide, but I will say one thing in my own favor before we begin. No matter which sex I went to bed with, I never smoked on the street. That's Florence King. So she's pretty much telling you that this whole thing is going to be about her struggle to live up to that picture of what a true Southern lady is. And it is. It's a hilarious book, by the way. A little dated in places, but still funny. So one thing Florence King has is a very definite voice. When people read my stories, a lot of people that know me personally say they can hear, when they read my stories, they hear it in my voice in their heads. And so when you write your stories, you want to develop your own personal voice. Now, y'all know I work for WBHM, and we're an NPR affiliate. And when I started teaching this class last year, I was listening to On Being with Krista Tippett. Any On Being fans? Any of y'all listen to On Being on Sundays on WBHM? Shameless promotion for WBHM. On Being is a nice little show that comes on Sunday evenings about faith and issues surrounding faith. But she was interviewing this author named Sandra Cisneros, who wrote a book called The House on Mango Street. Has anybody read that book? The House on Mango Street? Anyway, so I was listening to this. I actually happened to be down at my parents' house, and when I heard this little part of the interview that I'm about to share with you, my head just kind of snapped around because she spoke so clearly about voice. So Krista Tippett, who's the interviewer, she says to the author, "I'm just fascinated with how you wrote this." And she sort of sets up the story where the author is in her office in a room that's probably had been her childhood bedroom or a child's bedroom when families lived in the apartment. And Krista Tippett points out that there's a place where the author refers to herself as she in the beginning of the paragraph and then turns to I in mid-paragraph, which I thought was an incredibly interesting distinction to make and something that I had not paid attention to in writing. And of course, I snapped too. And so the paragraph that she cites is, and this is the author writing about herself, "The young woman's teaching job leads to the next. and now she finds herself a counselor recruiter at her alma mater, Loyola University on the north side in Rogers Park. I have benefits. I don't bring work home anymore. My workday ends at 5 p.m. Now I have evenings free to do my own work. I feel like a real writer. So did y'all hear that shift? She's talking about herself in the third person in the beginning, and then she switches just whoop, to talking about herself in the first person. And so Cisneros said in response, I think a writer has to come into her voice. I think a woman has to come into her voice because everyone speaks for us. And for me, when I was asked to write the introduction, I was studying the photograph, and I knew that's not who I am now, but that's who I was when I was working on those pieces. So I had to talk about her as a she in the third person. Y'all, that just rocked me to my core. I mean, it really did. That's why I went off and printed out the whole interview. So when you think about writing your own stories, think about your voice and how you want to talk about yourself and how you want to tell your stories, because a lot of people, when I talk about writing, a lot of people say something like, why should I write? There's nothing new to talk about. Everybody's written everything before. You know, it's just the same old stories, blah, blah, blah. What's the point? And the point is this. You can tell, each one of you can tell the same story, but no one of you will tell it the same as another person. So even if you are writing the same old story of going to the dry cleaners as the next person and what happened on the way to the ball field, nobody's ever going to tell your story like you tell it. And that is your voice. A lot of people, when I read like when students show me their cover letters, you know, they're going to apply for this job and they ask me to read their cover letter, and it always says something like, I am applying for a job so I can use my skills to the best of my ability. Every letter will say basically those same exact words. But that's not words that people say in real life. You're not going to go to your interview and say, I am applying for your job so I can use my skills to the best of my ability. So don't write like that. Write your stories like you would tell it. Don't write it like you think your 11th grade English teacher wants you to write it. Write it like you want to write it. Write it in your own voice. Let your personality come through. Let all that is good and great about you shine out like a light through your words. Now, one of my favorite authors, and somebody I want to be when I grow up, and somebody that I've had the great privilege of seeing more than once at the Alice Stevens Center, is David Sedaris. I love, love, love me some David Sedaris. I'll tell you a funny story. I can remember the first time I ever heard David Sedaris on NPR, and I can remember exactly where I was. And I will tell you, I lived in Avondale, and I was driving down University Boulevard, headed to the west, and I was at that red light where the first Iron Bowl was. Y'all know, right there by the Piggly Wiggly. And I heard this riveting story being told by a little old woman who smoked too many cigarettes. And then the announcer came on and said, that was David Sedaris reading his latest story. And I thought, who is this David Sedaris, and why does he sound like a little old woman that smokes too many cigarettes? And so I went and looked him up, and I've been a fan ever since. I've gotten to meet him, and he's just awesome. But you want to talk about somebody that has a voice. You can read any article by David Sedaris, and you can know it's him. One of his earliest books was this one, Me Talk Pretty One Day, which is a hilarious book. This is one of the few books that makes me laugh out loud every time I read it. The tears will stream down my face, and I'll have that kind of heaving laughter that, you know, that kind of hurts a little bit, but in such a good way. Also, let me state that nobody's paying me to, like, recommend their books. I wish David Sedaris would pay me to recommend his books because I do it all the time. But anyway, these are just my own personal choices. But he's got just a little passage in here that I think just speaks to voice and telling your story in a way that just, well, you'll hear it. You'll know what I'm saying. You'll know what I can't find the words to say, but David Sedaris did. He's talking here about a little bit about drug use. Just a warning. Speed's breathtaking high is followed by a crushing, suicidal depression. You're forced to pay tenfold for all the fun you thought you were having. It's torturous and demeaning, yet all you can think is that you want more. I might have thrown myself out the window, but I lived on the first floor and didn't have the energy to climb the stairs to the roof. Everything ached, and even without the speed, I was unable to sleep. Thinking I must have dropped a grain or two, I vacuumed the entire apartment with a straw up my nose, sucking up dead skin cells, comet residue, and pulverized cat litter. Anything that traveled on the bottom of a shoe went up my nose. Didn't he just bring that home? I mean, that is some voice right there. Nobody can write that the way that David Sedaris wrote it and make you at the same time feel bad for him and want him to get help and a little bit of, ooh, that was gross. But David Sedaris, I mean, he's got an awesome voice, and that voice comes through in everything he writes. And if you see him perform live or listen to him, you can find YouTube and videos of him doing readings. Or if you go to the Alice Stevens Center and sing, you'll never be able to not read his stories. You'll never be able to read his stories and not hear it in his voice. So that's what you want. You want to be David Sedaris without the cat litter and the speed and the drug problem. Do we have any questions about voice?
I hate to show my ignorance, but have you written stuff that you've published that I should be aware of?
When we started watching all these people doing Zooms from their house, I thought, I could do that. I wrote this book, They Call Me Orange Juice. You can buy it off Amazon. It's a collection of stories and essays about growing up and living in the South. And I also maintain a blog, although I have to admit that I have not blogged in a few months, at folkwaysnowadays.com. And later on, I can read an essay out of there if we have time and y'all want to hear it. One thing that really inspires me to write my blog, which I've done for almost 10 years, is things that happen when I go out in public. Well, we hadn't been doing a whole lot of for the last year, going out in public. So even as somebody who has been a very prolific writer at a time, I just be straight up honest with y'all. It has hit my creativity where I live. Like, because you go out and you have some funny occurrence and it brings up a thought or you overhear a conversation. I tell you, one of the best things for writing inspiration is eavesdropping. If you sit behind me in a restaurant, you better bet your bottom dollar I'm listening to your conversation. I love to listen to other people's conversations. I'm shameless about it. My husband will be like, would you quit listening to people's conversations? Because I'm all like, what's happening? But anyway, that's how you learn stuff and how you get good material to write. Because I'm not a very interesting person. I mean, I'd have quit blogging 2 years ago if it was all about my stories. It's all about stuff that happens to you and how you tell it. That's another thing that I don't really have in my notes is how you tell it. I guess that goes under voice. Like, well, I'll read you a story about how you tell it later on. I think it's pretty funny. I hope you will too. But something can happen to you, like you can have a wardrobe malfunction and you can just be like, I had a wardrobe malfunction. That was embarrassing. Or you can tell it like I told it. So I'll read y'all, remind me and I'll read y'all that story. Everybody loves a good wardrobe malfunction. All right. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I guess related to that is, so did you just start writing and what you put down was your voice, or did you kind of have to work at it?
That's a great question. I think I probably developed it because when I go back and read some earlier essays, they're a little different from the way I write now. So you'll kind of find your comfort zone. I didn't really realize it till I started this web log, is what it was when I started, that I've been writing creatively my whole entire life. I remember my mother had it. Okay, let me back up the truck and I'll tell y'all a little quick history. I'm from the great metropolis of Citronelle, Alabama, which is down in northwest Mobile County. It is the oil capital of Alabama. That's OIL. I have a hard time saying that word sounding the way I do. It's the oil capital of Alabama. And my mother and my grandfather had a little insurance agency. Well, in Citronelle, Alabama, in the early 70s, I mean, there's no like daycare. I mean, there's nowhere, like if granny's not keeping your kids, they just go with you. So I spent a lot of time at this office with my mother and my grandfather, and of course I had to entertain myself because we didn't have these. We didn't even have cable. We only got 3 channels of television at home. I mean, so I would do things like put together little newspapers and like write the stories and draw the pictures and make copies of them, like by hand make copies because, there was no like Xeroxing, and pass them out. So in retrospect, I've been writing my whole life, and I can go back and look at things that I wrote in college and in my early 20s, just little fun things, little one-off things I would write, and I can see my voice developing. So I've been at it for more years than I care to admit in public and on a recording. But your voice will come. You will develop it. You just have to be yourself and not be scared to be yourself. Don't worry that somebody's going to read your story and be like, oh, that's boring, or she's not telling it right, or you just gotta like free yourself. You gotta just shed those inhibitions about being yourself and just let your true light shine. Just let it come through. I've spent a lot of years not letting my light shine. So, once I decided I was going to let my light shine, it was Katie bar the door. Gotta let your light shine. That's my life lesson tonight. Let your light shine. And y'all, just a little secret. I got like these 2 ring lights because that's what we're supposed to do. But I gesture and I keep bumping into these ring lights. So if things look like that, it's not because of aliens or anything. It's because I've hit these lights again. All right. We ready to move on? Yay! Okay. Setting is the next one. Now, when I started teaching this class, I called it place. But I very early on realized that place was the wrong word, because place sort of gives you the connotation of like a physical place, whereas setting is a little grander. And that's what I want you to think when you are thinking about where your hero's journey, where your personal journey, your personal story occurs. So, setting obviously encompasses the physical location, where you're at where you are, where you're at. Anyway, where you are. But it can also be where you are in the grand scheme of existence, where you are in history, where you are in time, where you are in cultural movement. All that encompasses setting. Private places, public places. Are you, hiding under, a soft kitty snuggie in your closet? Or are you out at Railroad Park basking in the sunlight? Are you in the 1800s? Are you, if you're writing your grandmother's memoir, her setting is, or your grandmother's biography, not her memoir, her setting would be very different than yours. My granny that I loved and for whom I'm named was born in 1903. So when I write stories about her, the whole setting's very different. I was born in 1969. I was born in the middle of a cultural revolution, the Vietnam War. I remember watching the Watergate trials on television, or some of my earliest memories, or the Watergate hearings. So that's a whole different setting. So when I write my stories, they're different when I write other people's stories. And when you're thinking about setting, think about what the place, what your setting represents. What is its meaning to you? What's its cultural significance? What's its significance to you? What is it, not only what does it look like, but what does it feel like? Anybody ever been to New Orleans in July? Anybody ever been to Mobile in July? Anybody ever been to the Publix anywhere in Birmingham in July and walked across the hot parking lot? I mean, what does that feel like? You've got to think about how all these things, what does it smell like? I'll go back to New Orleans because we used to go to New Orleans a lot. Anybody ever walk down Bourbon Street at 8 o'clock in the morning? It's got a smell. It's got a very distinct smell of too much fun and a little redemption. That's what Bourbon Street smells like. So you've got to think of all these things about your setting, not just, I was in my room, I was at the store. You've got to really take your readers to this place, to this time, to this era with you. Y'all can do that, right? Everybody with me? It's so hard on Zooms to gauge the reaction. Another thing is you got to think about war and peacetime, like big historical things that are happening at the same time as your story. Like, I feel like nobody will ever write about what they did on January the 6th the same way, or September 11th, or D-Day, any of those days. So you've got to think about your story in the context of, the greater story of life in general. Okay, Malcolm Gladwell fans? I like Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote this book called Outliers, about successful people you might not know. And he does just a really good job of setting up Harlan, Kentucky, of all places, Harlan, Kentucky. And he brings a lot of these elements we just talked about in. So I'm going to read you a little short piece from Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers about Harlan, Kentucky. And so y'all think about all the things we've just talked about, and you can pick them out. In the southeastern corner of Kentucky, in the stretch of the Appalachian Mountains known as the Cumberland Plateau, lies a small town called Harlan. The Cumberland Plateau is a wild and mountainous region of flat-top ridges, mountain walls 500 to 1,000 feet high, and narrow valleys, some wide enough only for a one-lane road and a creek. When the area was first settled, the plateau was covered with a dense primeval forest. Giant tulip poplars grew in the coves and at the foot of the hills, some with trunks as wide as 7 or 8 feet in diameter. Alongside them are white oaks, beeches, maples, walnuts, sycamores, birches, willows, cedars, pines, and hemlocks, all enmeshed in a lattice of wild grapevine, comprising one of the greatest assortment of forest trees in the northern hemisphere. On the ground were bears and mountain lions and rattlesnakes. In the treetops, an astonishing array of squirrels. And beneath the soil, one thick seam after another of coal. Harlan County was founded in 1819 by 8 immigrant families from the northern regions of the British Isles. They had come to Virginia in the 18th century and then moved west into the Appalachians in search of land. The county was never wealthy. For its first 100 years, it was thinly populated, rarely numbering more than 10,000 people. The first settlers kept pigs and herded sheep on the hillsides, scratching out a living on small farms in the valleys. They made whiskey in backyard stills and felled trees, floating them down the Cumberland River in the spring when the water was high. Until well into the 20th century, getting to the nearest train station was a 2-day wagon trip. The only way out of town was up Pine Mountain, which was 9 steep miles on a road that turned on occasion into no more than a muddy, rocky trail. Harlan was a remote and strange place, unknown by the larger society around it, and it might well have remained so, but for the fact that two of the town's founding families, the Howards and the Turners, did not get along. So see how he pulls in physical description, and he pulls in history, and he pulls in a little lifestyle, and it's all there in 3 paragraphs. So he pretty much hit just about every high point. The physical characteristics, pretty much everything but smell. But, you know, with all that greenery, we can imagine some smell. So there you have it, setting. And another person who does setting well is another one of my favorites is Anthony Bourdain. Got any Anthony Bourdain fans? Y'all, I miss Anthony Bourdain. Wasn't that the saddest? Love me some Anthony Bourdain. The first book of his that I read, and the first book of his was Kitchen Confidential, where he talks about how he got started. And also, Anthony Bourdain is somebody that has a very distinct voice. Like if you read something written by Anthony Bourdain, you know it. I mean, it doesn't sound like anybody else's writing.
I liked him a lot, but I never actually read anything he wrote. I bought a couple of his books after he passed away, but I don't know, first I couldn't bring myself to read them because it made me so sad. And then I'm not a great reader. I'm more of a doer, but at the same time, I have some very interesting family stories because I'm an Asian immigrant. And so I feel like maybe I should. And I've told some of these stories to my friends, and they've told me you need to write this down. Yeah. So anyway, but it was such a shock to hear about Bourdain. I mean, and is it known why? Why?
I don't know why, but it was a shock. And I know we had a lot of his television shows recorded on our DVR, and I just went and deleted them all because that was just too sad to go watch them. But I don't know why. Family histories are a great way to start your writing, to get those stories down. I wish that I had gotten more of my grandmother's stories, and my mother has not as much as she used to, a memory like a steel trap. So when she would start telling stories, my mother knows about people that they don't know about themselves, y'all. Don't tell anybody I said that. But she really does. So when she would start telling these stories that only she knew, I started writing them down. Like I just carry a little notebook with me. And when, she starts telling these stories, I start writing them down because she's the only one that knows them. And, when my mother's gone, those stories will be gone. So family history is a great way to start. Definitely. Hence the name of this class, Write Your Life. Anthony Bourdain wrote his first book about his own life. And this is about his first job. And I'm going to read you just a little bit. Because it really sets the scene. On the strength of my diploma and my willingness to work for peanuts, I landed a job almost right away at the venerable New York institution, the Rainbow Room, high atop Rockefeller Center. It was my first experience of the real big time, one of the biggest, busiest, and best-known restaurants in the country. I was willing to do anything to prove myself, and when I got in that elevator to the 64th floor kitchen for the first time, I felt as if I were blasting off to the moon. The Rainbow Room at that time sat a little over 200. The Rainbow Grill sat about another 150. Add that to 2 lounges where food was available and an entire floor of banquet rooms, all of them serviced simultaneously by a single central a la carte kitchen, and you had some major league volume, as well as some major league cooks to go along with it. The crew at the room was a rough bunch, a motley assortment of Puerto Ricans, Italians, Dominicans, Swiss, Americans, and a Basque or two. They were mostly older guys who'd worked in the hangar-sized kitchen forever, their jobs secured by a union whose only discernible benefits were guaranteed job security and an assured mediocrity of cuisine. These were some hard-case, full-grown, 8-cylinder bastards, none of whom cared about anything outside of their station. The room management worked them like rented mules. A long, hot line of glowing flat tops ran along one wall, flames actually roaring back up into a firewall behind them. A few feet across, separated by a narrow, trench-like workspace, ran an equally long stainless steel counter, much of which was taken up by a vast open steam table that was kept at a constant rolling boil. What the cooks had to contend with, then, was a long, uninterrupted slot with no air circulation, with nearly unbearable dry radiant heat on one side and clouds of wet steam heat on the other. When I say unbearable, I mean they couldn't bear it. Cooks would regularly pass out on the line and have to be dragged off to recuperate, someone taking over the station until the stricken chef had recovered. There was so much heat coming off those ranges, especially when the center rings were popped for direct fire, that the filters in the overhead hoods would often burst into flames, inspiring a somewhat comical scene as the overweight Italian chef would hurl himself down the narrow line with the fire extinguisher, bowling over the cooks and tripping as he hurried to put out the flames before the central Ansel system went off and filled the entire kitchen with fire suppressant foam. Y'all know where he's at, don't ya? You got a clear picture. The time, the place, you can feel the heat, the sweat. I'll spare you the description of the locker room where all the chefs and everybody changed, because it's a little gross. But you'll also know where you've been once you read it. Anthony Bourdain really takes you to a place. Any more questions about setting? All right. So here's the $1 million question. How did these authors do it? How do they do it? How do they relay their theme? How do they share their voice? How do they take you to their setting? Well, there's a few key literary conventions that they all use, and you can use too, should you choose to, should it fit in with your voice. One thing that I think is probably pretty obvious from the readings is the use of details. Sometimes I say detail, sometimes I say details. Y'all know what I'm talking about. The use of detail. Describe, describe, describe. You really want to show people what you want them to understand, not just tell them. You don't want to tell people that you're sad. You don't want to tell people you're in the forest. You want to show them. You want to paint a picture. You want to build it up for them. Anybody can say, I went to Jim and Nick's and got ribs for dinner. But, you want to paint the picture of what the smoke smelled like and how the sauce ran down your arms and how you were so full as a tick. You just couldn't stand it. You just want to paint these pictures for people. Another way
So I have a question about that. When is it too much? Because I know when I read some things, I get bored with the detail and I skip over those paragraphs.
I hear you. And y'all, don't be mad at me when I tell you this, but I had a real hard time as a child reading Little House on the Prairie books because Laura Ingalls Wilder goes into extreme details. This is a judgment call. You don't want to just give details for the sake of detail. You want to give the important details, the meaningful details. Okay. When I go to my office, if ever I go to my office again, at the radio station, the public radio station, there's a yellow sticky note on my monitor, and it has in it the public radio mantra, the fewest, most powerful words. Say that again, the fewest, most powerful words. So you want to really think about the important details, the ones that will tell your story in the best possible way, the best words that you can find, the most powerful words you can find. And also, every detail is not important. And some details are super important. If your grandmother wore a pink hat to Easter service, that might not be an important detail. If the next year she wore a yellow hat and the year after that she wore a blue hat and the year after that she wore a lavender hat. If your grandmother wore a pink hat to church every Easter Sunday from the time she was a girl till the time they put her in the coffin and shoveled that last shovelful of dirt down on top of the box, that's an important detail. So you got to find those important details, the ones that just really speak to the story. And that's a judgment call, which is not a great answer. And I realize that, and I wish I could tell you 5 details is the max that you want, but it might be one major detail. In the first time I taught the class, this nice lady took the class and she wrote a story about how her mother had died, and she went to help her father clean out her mother's belongings. Her parents had been divorced. And the neighbor lady came to help clean out this stuff. And she described a ring that the neighbor lady was wearing. Now, is the ring that the neighbor lady is wearing an important thing to describe in detail? Maybe not. If the ring that your late mother's neighbor lady is wearing is your mother's wedding ring, That's a detail. So it's all a judgment call. But you gotta find the juicy ones, the good ones. And then all the fluff, the rest, Here's another thing about writing. And I know I've kind of strayed off a little bit. But this is an important point to make. When you write your story, you don't just put it down on paper and send it to HarperCollins. When you write your story, writing is mainly rewriting. You write your story and then you read it back to see how it flows. You write your story and you read it back and see if the timeline makes sense. You write your story and you read it back and you edit and you hone it down. Have y'all heard the phrase like kill your darlings? Like you might really want to use the word chartreuse in your story. Like you might just love the word chartreuse. It might be your favorite word in your whole house and everything in it is chartreuse. But if it doesn't fit in your story, you might have to kill it. Chartreuse might have to go. And you got to be okay with that. You got to be ruthless sometimes when you edit your own work. Ruthless. But it'll pay off in the end, I promise. If you read your own stories and you're like, ugh, this is so boring, there's too many details, then, that's a signal. Anyway, writing is rewriting. Always rewriting and editing and rewriting some more. Dorothy Parker said one time, I hate writing, but I love to have written. And that pretty much is the crux of the biscuit right there. I mean, that just sums the whole thing up. So anyway, we'll go back to how they did it. Along with voice comes style and word choice and sentence structure. Even if you're writing academic, when I teach this class for art play, invariably I have several UAB researchers that will take the class that do a lot of academic writing. Academic writing is very different from this kind of creative nonfiction writing. And your writing style, when you're writing a paper on, I'm a writer, not a scientist, so on some ultra sciencey thing, it's going to be very different. If you're going to publish it in the Journal of American Medicine, it is very different than if you're going to make a Christmas story to send out to your family and friends. So your style will be different. Your language will be different. Your word choice will be different. You're not going to write about your family and say, heretofore and henceforth we have visited the Thanksgiving table to sit down for a repast or something like that. You're going to say, on Thanksgiving Day we all gathered around the big table and, had a nice dinner. Sentence structure. My brother is a Catholic priest and he is an academic, whatever was an academic. And he was going to have a paper published in a magazine and he asked me to proofread it for him. My brother starts every sentence with a dependent clause. It's when thinking about the such and such and the such and such and such and such, and then he goes off into this. Every sentence is 5 miles long and starts with a clause. You can't read that over and over and over again. You got to shake it up a little bit. You got to have some long sentences and some short sentences, some single words. I like things in threes. I will say, it was hot, hot, hot. Or I'll say, I went to the store. I went to the park. I went to the pool. You got to shake it up. If you're telling about a foot race that you were on as a child and how you struggled and just went faster and faster till you finally won that race, as you write that story, your sentences might get a little faster and a little choppier and a little shorter, and it'll sort of take your reader along with you like they're running right there with you. If you write a sentence with 3 dependent clauses and a bunch of semicolons and a lot of conjunctions, your reader's going to feel like they run a marathon and not in a good way. So you want to think about how your writing style and your sentence structure and your word choice affects your reader. Onomatopoeia. Y'all know what onomatopoeia is. That's words that sound like what they mean. But some words are sad and depressing, and some words are happy and perky. And if you're telling a happy, perky story, you don't want to use a bunch of long, low-sounding, sad, depressing words. So all that comes into play. The other thing you want to look at is when you write your story out. Let me just get this Anthony Bourdain book real quick. You want to look at what it looks like on the page. You want to see like some white space. Like if you're reading if you type your thing out and print it, see all that white space? You want to make sure there's some white space. Your readers won't want to read. Anybody ever read William Faulkner? Anybody ever read Absalom? Like sometimes you have to go back and try and underline where the nouns and verbs are to try and find where the sentence started and where it ended, and it's just pages and pages and pages of no white space. You got to give your readers a little visual break, a little mental break, a little white space to shake it up so they'll stay with you. Otherwise they'll be like, oh my God, Snopes is get on with it. So you want to have some white space. Imagery. You want to engage all the senses. Look, there I went with the aliens again. I just about knocked that thing over. You want to engage all the senses: sight, smell, touch, feeling, hearing. Even if you're writing something that will be read, there will be sounds involved. You want to relate all that to your readers. Rhythm and pacing, we talked a little bit about that. Some people have a very rhythmic way of writing, but you don't want to be so rhythmic that you lull people to sleep. You want to shake it up a little bit from time to time. Have like a one word sentence, or bam, like Emerald, bam, put a little something in there to shake it up. Humor is a way people do it. Overall tone of your piece. Humor is hard. If you're not a naturally funny person, it's hard to write funny things. If you're a naturally funny person, it will come a lot easier to you. Humor's really hard. That's why there's a lot more stand-up comics not being successful in bars than there are with HBO specials. Humor's really hard. Think about those good old middle school lessons like simile and metaphor. It was I tell you, I wrote a whole lot on my blog about Southern idioms, which is basically similes, like or as. Like, if my great aunt thought something was too expensive, she would say, that can of soup was high as a cat's back. It was too expensive. The price was too high. Now, she could just say the chicken noodle soup was expensive, or she could say it was high as a cat's back. That's more interesting. I tend to use a lot of, particularly Southern idioms when I write and when I talk, because it's interesting. I work with a fellow, Michael Crow. Y'all have heard him on the radio. He's from upstate New York. We have very different upbringings. So the first time that Michael and I were going out to lunch, maybe not the first time, but early on in our working together career, I said, "Oh, are you ready to go to lunch? I'm so hungry, my stomach thinks my throat's been cut." Michael looked at me like, "What'd you say?" I said, "I'm so hungry, my stomach thinks my throat's been cut." My mother has said that my whole entire life. It just rolls off. But it's interesting. I mean, I could just say, "I'm hungry, let's go." Or I could say, "I'm so hungry, my stomach thinks my throat's been cut." That paints a picture. Punctuation is also something that you can think about to set your mood and your tone. Exclamation points, ellipses. I'm a big fan of the M dash. Once I discovered the M dash, it was on. The M dash is like my secret mistress. Like I am trying to use that M dash wherever I can. I love an M dash. It's great when you want to separate a sentence, but you don't want to be as stuffy as a semicolon, but you want to put something else in there. M dash is great. I love an M dash. Ellipses. Do you trail off? ... at the end of your sentence. I'm also addicted to the exclamation point, which it's a habit I'm trying to break. Although I'm not crawling around on the floor trying to snort up exclamation points. That's about what it feels like. I need to get rid of so many exclamation points. But I tend to be an excited person, and I want everything to be happy and excited. So I put a lot of exclamation points. But anyway, that's some things you can use. Any questions? Ask me anything. I'm an open book. All right.
A question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, so you had a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get it published at the first place you went to?
I used a hybrid publisher. The publisher I used is called Archway Publishing, which is part of Simon & Schuster, but it's like a hybrid between self-publishing and being published. So yes, is the answer. Because I didn't want to send out a bunch of query letters. I went to a few years ago. Archway, that published my book, was at the Book Expo in New York City at the Javits Center. Have any of y'all been to the Javits Center in New York? You could take the Birmingham airport and all the runways and drop it down in the center of the Javits Center and still have room for snack bars all around the edge. It's huge and everybody's there. It's the event of the publishing world. It's where all the book publishers have their new books and all the booksellers go to scope it out. Everybody from Amazon to Barnes & Noble to the nice ladies at Thank You Books are there to see what the new books are for their stores. So here's my little book on the shelf at the Archway Publishing table, along with 5 million other books, at least by 50 gazillion other authors. If you have ever wanted to feel about as small and insignificant, like a gnat on a flea, have your little book at the Book Expo at the Javits Center. And it was in that moment that I realized that I had published this book and people were actually buying it, but that your chances of Simon & Schuster reading your words and saying, "Oh my God, like David Sedaris, let me give you $100,000 retainer to tell your story," are slim to none. Really slim's being generous. I would say next to none to none. So I was happy, publishing a book was on my life bucket list. It was something I wanted to do. I work a full-time job. Writing is not my full-time career. If you want to publish a book, you have to have an agent. You have to send query letters to find an agent. That agent has to shop your book around. And publishers are so inundated by books, everything from like how to play Monopoly with your cat to, you know, cocktails for all your friends living and dead. I mean, like, there are so many books written about so many things shopped around to so many harried, tired people that are getting these query letters. It's a miracle anything ever gets published. I mean, I'm going to be straight up honest with you. I came home from the Javits Center with my little badge and my little book and my little goodie bag, and I felt awesome because my book had been up there amongst them. But I also thought, my God, I would be a pile of shriveled bones and dust before this book ever got picked up. So, I mean, I just want to be honest. It's hard to get published. Super hard to get published traditionally, which is why the hybrid publishing and the self-publishing model has taken off incredibly in probably the last 10 years. Because now I can write a book about how to play Monopoly with my cat, and if I want to bad enough, it can be on Amazon in a week. This took a little bit more. This took probably about 6 months because they actually screen the books that they take. They don't take every book. It had professional editing, which if you want to publish, I highly recommend getting a professional editor. My friend that was an English teacher read the book and edited it for me. My friend that's got really good grammar edited the book for me. I feel like I have great grammar because I have a degree in English, and I felt like my book was beyond reproach anyway. And they all said it was good because your friends will lie. Your friends will look you in the face and say, oh, honey, that's the best book. It's wonderful. I loved every minute of it. Didn't even find a comma splice. They lie like rugs. Either they didn't read it, or they're too kind to tell you that you wouldn't know your semicolon from your A double slinky letters if your life depended on it. So get a professional editor, somebody that doesn't know you, somebody that will tell you the cold, hard truth, somebody that does not care about your feelings. Not your mom. My mother's an English teacher. Although my mother is very critical of my writing because she taught English at the college level. So we were talking about sentence structure. Part of my style is sentence fragments. I do it all the time. I have these little fragments. And my mother will read a blog post and she'll call me and she'll say, honey, fragments. You had a fragment there in paragraph 3. And I'll say, but Mama, that's my style. That's my style. Fragments is my style. That's my voice. And she says, I don't care. It's a fragment. It's not grammatically correct. I'm like, all right. So we have our little give and take. But you just got to stand up and be yourself and stand up for your own style. Did that answer your question, or did I ramble on too much?
No, I mean, it does. I think what I was going to get to was, and you did answer it. I wondered how much editorial input went into your book. And so I guess the way you published it, how much professional editing went into it. So I guess not too much.
Well, I mean, every word of it was edited. So as edited as it could be, it was edited. And the man saw things that I never thought of. Inconsistencies. Editing is more than just, like comma splices. It's also like consistency. Like you say one thing one way over here, and then 3 chapters later you say it a different way. I mean, it's all encompassing. But I felt like the editor did an extremely thorough job, both thematically, grammatically, all the articles that you can think of. And there were a few things I took 99% of his edits. I was like, oh, I can't believe I did that. Yes, yes, yes. But there were 1 or 2 edits that I did not accept because I thought it altered the way I wanted to tell the story. You know, it was like my word choice or a colloquialism or something like that. So there were a few things that I did not take. So, but editing, highly recommend it. I was shocked, y'all. I thought I was so good, and I know nothing about writing, apparently, after being edited by this man. All right. We're doing okay on time. We're doing okay on time. All righty. One of my favorite things to do, I saved this for the last. People are my favorite thing in the world. I like listening to people, watching people, and that brings us to character development. I'm so intrigued by people, why they do what they do, how they say what they say, what's their motivation. So in telling the story of your life, you can be your character, but I'm sure we've all known people in our lives that were characters. Like, you know, somebody say, oh, that guy, he's a real character. You know, the best thing about creative nonfiction is you don't have to sit around like fiction writers do trying to think up characters for your stories. Your characters are all right there. You're related to your characters. Your characters are your neighbors. Your characters are the lady at the Piggly Wiggly. Your characters are built in for you. And as writers, as authors, our job is not just to tell about our character. Our job is to reveal our characters. You don't want to just say, oh, Bob Jones was a mean old so-and-so. You want to reveal it throughout your story. You want to build your characters. You want to create them. You want to mold, even though they're real life people, you want to mold your characters like clay and make them real well-rounded characters. And when you think about writing about people, you know, early on we said if you write about real life people, you've got to get their permission if you want to publish it. But also when you write about real life people, you want your real life characters to be dimensional. And sometimes that's hard because we love our loved ones and we want them to be wonderful, good, honest, stand up angels sent down from heaven. But that is not a real true picture of anybody. Everybody, even the best person, has a little bit of a bad side. And your worst people in your life probably have some little glimmer of a redeeming quality. And so when you write about people, you don't want to put them up on a pedestal, nor do you want to just damn them as reprobates. You want to make them well-rounded people and show all these sides. Because often where the beauty in your writing comes is in that contrast. And also, when you write about people, you want to not only think about their looks and what they do, but you want to think about what makes people people. What are their fears? What are their dreams? What are their hopes? What are their thoughts? What are their motivations? Do they have interesting mannerisms? Do they have obnoxious, habits? All these things that, like, what are they, not just what they're wearing. He wore a blue plaid shirt, but what are they, what do they carry with them? What do they like wear as like a cloak of armor? You know, maybe it's a feeling, or maybe it's a gruff nature. You want to use all these things to build up your character. And you want to figure out and build up what makes your characters extraordinary. Even ordinary people, even the most milquetoast, bland, boring person can be made extraordinary. It's your job to figure out how. Maybe they're extraordinary in their blandness, but everybody has some sort of extraordinary characteristic that can be brought out. You want to, excuse me. Funny, I'm about to say this because I've been talking for a little while now, but you want to build your characters with dialogue. Talking. How do they talk? I've got a very distinct, strong Southern accent. That's probably the thing people tell me most and notice most about me. But do people have accents? But also, do they have dialect? You know, like my friend Michael Krau's never going to say, I'm so hungry, my stomach thinks my throat's been cut. You want to think about jargon. Is there professional jargon that people use? If your daddy is a coal miner in Walker County, he's going to have like a particular jargon or way of speaking. And also, when you write, feel free to put in little bits of dialogue here and there. Dialogue makes things interesting, which brings me to a point. When David Sedaris writes verbatim a conversation he had with his teacher in the 2nd grade, David Sedaris doesn't remember that conversation verbatim from the 2nd grade. I mean, I hate to burst that bubble, but he doesn't. He is taking a little artistic license. And in the true world of creative nonfiction, that's a little bit of controversy, is how far you can embellish your story to make it readable. There are some people like David Sedaris that would just flat out make up a conversation unabashedly. Not ashamed of it. He'll tell you, I'm not outing David Sedaris on making up conversations in the 2nd grade. But there are some people, long-form journalists, strict adherence to the facts, you know. So you have to make your own personal decision about how much you want to embellish your story for the sake of the story. Now, here's a little hint. Many years ago, not many, a few, I worked as a paralegal. I was a paralegal for 13 years. And part of my job was helping prepare people to give their depositions. And one thing that we always told people when we were preparing them to give their deposition is that you might not remember exactly what you did, but you can remember what you would have done. If you left the house every Tuesday morning with a blue umbrella, just in case, and you did that every day for your whole entire life, then on the Tuesday in question, you might not remember if you had that blue umbrella, but you can pretty well say you did based on your life experience. So, for instance, my grandmother always said, I Swanee. That was something she said a lot. Instead of oh my or whatever, she always said, I Swanee. So if I write a story about my grandmother McDonald, if I write about something that happened that would have surprised her, I don't remember if when I was 3 she said I Swanee, but the likelihood that she said it is pretty high. So you can build these conversations based on snippets of memories or what people normally said and tell a well-rounded story. It's all, again, a judgment call. when you're also talking about your characters, you want to think about culture and class and value and belief systems and religion and faith and all those kind of things that make a person a whole person. You want to think about internal conflicts they might have had as well as external conflicts. So all these things that we feel as people and the heroes of our story, other people are feeling too, and we want to bring that out. One thing, and I'm not saying y'all do this, but one thing is that you always want to avoid stereotyping people. You can write what you think somebody would have done based on their experience, but don't write what you think somebody would have done based on some stereotype that you have of that person. That's my only caution. So, let's see.
Can you give an example of that, of a stereotype that you mean?
Yeah, I'll give a gentle example of a stereotype. And this might be a Southern trait. My mother has a tendency to attribute characteristics to people based on their last name or where they were born. And this is not a real life example, but a made up one. She will say something like, he's a Turner. Turners, they live down by the river. Those Turners can't hold a job. Now, this person might be a perfectly fine person, but she has stereotyped him based on the location that he came from and his last name. So you want to think of, everybody's got some sort of inherent bias, and we've especially been talking a lot about bias these days, so I feel like people are probably more aware of it. But you just want to make sure you're not making like sweeping generalizations about a whole class of people or about somebody based on their physical characteristics or other characteristics, place of birth. I'll give you a good one. This is a good one. When I open my mouth on a phone call with people that are not from here, a lot of times, based on things they say to me, they automatically assume that I'm a little stupid. Because you know what? Southern people are dumb. Any television show you watch, any movie you watch, if you want to have a dumb character, you'll make them sound like a Southerner. But that's not true. I'm a very smart person. I have not one but 2 college degrees. Just because I sound like this doesn't make me dumb. So that's a perfect example of stereotyping people. And you want to avoid that. So if you moved here from Vermont and your neighbor is a nice Southern person, don't stereotype her automatically as being dumb, if you're going to write about her. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, Southern stereotypes. Whew, that just gets my blood boiling. Because, sounding like I do, I encounter that quite a lot. So that's a good one.